We'll keep it with the people, Kartik, because we're all about the people. We talk about markets because we are still worried about how people are investing in the markets or mutual funds. We're all about the people. And Amit, we know what has been happening with the people and their expenses over the last month or so. It began with tomatoes, it went on to ginger and then to dal, tur dal and urad dal, food inflation to the point where it pulled up the overall inflation. Usually crude oil price increase pulls up the overall inflation. Tomato and dal pulled up the overall inflation in this country, but I'm hearing that there's going to be some good news.
Okay, so government has been taking it step by step. They curtailed exports. They put duties on exports of rice and sugar. Then they started importing tomatoes from little quantities from Nepal, or at least the UP and the North Indian markets. Now they have instructed, if I can get the graphics up, NCCF and NAFED to start selling onions and at a very low price.
Yeah. 25 rupees a kg for onions, they've been told.
Yeah, right, because they're putting export curbs on onions.
50 bucks a kg for tomatoes, 25 rupees a kg for onions. I mean, these were normal prices before this food inflation had actually hit us.
But they're doing with their onions what they did with rice.
What they did with rice, exactly.
So it's 40% export duty.
Yeah, export duty and a price cap.
Yes.
A retail price cap.
Retail price cap. So both ways. So you're controlling local prices and you're also making sure supply remains perfect, because because of the export duty, the exports get cut short. But I also want to understand this is a beginning of a process, isn't it? Because, for example, tomatoes, we had the issue of not enough sowing happening in the country, and hence, you were forced to.
No, but they're saying the kharif crops sowing, the government believes, is not going to be affected by the 6% deficit in the rainfall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is because
Krishna,
the timing is all right.
Most critical here, I think, no matter whatever the government issues by way of, of announcements and press releases,
yes.
I think it's very important to read between the lines here and not discard the fact that this is election year. This is the making of the election year, right? Before this time next year, in the month of May next year, we would have a new government in office, the same government in third term or a new government altogether in the month of May. This is the critical year for the government to ensure that if it wants to come back to power, food inflation, which impacts every single constituency, which impacts every single voter and every single citizen, is not something that should play a party spoiler for the government to come back.
Yeah,
so the government will have to pull all stops this year, and they've had a bad track record. The monsoon was not favorable. The El Nino conditions still in the making. We've read not going to play great party sports for them.
Expecting because of El Nino.
So with election year, with election year, it's going to be absolutely imperative for the government to pull all stops and go after food inflation.
Yeah.
And seems they are.
And onion prices, Amit, in India's political history, we've seen parties lose elections being turned around because of onion prices.
Yeah, because
and imagine the pressure on the government, Krishna. Sorry, Amit, we'll just come back to you. The pressure on the government because you've stopped export of rice, non-basmati rice. Now, this is something which constitutes a good 60% of the world's food basket. There is pressure from the rest of the world for India to restart rice exports. So, we are in a position that we want to curtail food inflation domestically at the cost of GDP.
Right. Amit, you were saying?
No, yeah. Talking about onions. Onions affect the lower classes. The farmers in Punjab, I know for a fact, they eat onions with roti. That's their staple diet. So you can't affect that. That affects not just elections, but everybody.
It's the lowest common denominator for food sometimes.
Yeah.
Onions become the lowest common denominator for food on many occasions. So, we are hoping that prices will start normalizing from next month onwards.
Though roti pyaz has been the common adage, right? I think for the poverty stricken, the below poverty line,
right.
just two plain rotis and onion is a square meal for them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think onion prices, tomato prices, importing 5,000 tons from Nepal, importing whatever 11,000 tons of onions from wherever in the world. I think the government will have to pull all stops, being election year, at the cost of a GDP slowdown. GDP growth or degrowth is not something that impacts the last mile. Food prices does. And the government is saying that even if our food export, our rice export or dal export or wheat export has to suffer on account of current account deficit and its contribution to the GDP, as long as we are able to import in excess quantity and keep food inflation in check in election year, is something that is going to ensure that we would have a better chance of coming back to office.
Look at that retail inflation number that are flashing, Kartik.
37% food inflation. That is the food
and
inflation.
apart from vegetables, the highest increases have come in spices, with 23% increase in spices. Even cereals and pulses are lower than the increase in cereals and pulses are lower than the one in spices. We are
Food
a country
inflation
of
at
spices.
12%, vegetable inflation 37%, overall headline inflation 7.7% or so, 7.8%. I mean, we are talking about big numbers here, and this is headline inflation. This is not core inflation. Core inflation can be managed with tightening of the monetary policy, but headline inflation is something which is a pure function of demand and supply will have to be augmented.
Right, and that's what is being attempted at this stage, and we hope that the prices, get some sanity by next month. That's what Amit tells us based on what has been happening so far.
And they're aggressive. They'll just be keeping their fingers crossed that the crude remains at 90 a barrel, at least under 100.
Yes, that is one thing, and of course, all eyes will be on these food prices because we are in an election year.